The dock lights cut through the humid Michigan night like search beams slicing through fog of forgotten promises. When Evelyn Hargrove stepped onto my pier at 11:47 p.m., her pearl necklace catching the glow and throwing it back in tiny, arrogant flashes that danced across the water like fireflies with attitude, each glint a reminder of the money she had stolen from families who had trusted her with their homes and their futures, families who had poured their life savings into lakefront dreams, only to wake up to foreclosure notices signed with her looping signature in blue ink that looked innocent but was poison seeping into the veins of community trust. She held the keys to my boat in one manicured hand, the other resting on the rail of the sleek black hull as if she already owned it, her fingers tracing the carbon fiber edge with the proprietary air of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. The kind of touch that left fingerprints on souls and liens on properties that had been in the same family since the Great Depression when grandfathers fought for every acre with sweat and stubbornness, their calluses like armor against the world. Behind her, two assistants in identical navy blazers hovered with clipboards and flashlights, their faces pale under the sodium lamps that turned everything the color of old bruises and broken promises, the light reflecting off their badges that read Harbor View Enforcement in letters too perfect to be real. The kind of badges you could buy online for $20 but carried the weight of her ego and the thread of her connections like a storm cloud heavy with rain that never quite broke. "Your little pleasure craft violates our lakefront aesthetic standards," Evelyn announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had never been told no, the kind of voice that could make a grown man apologize for breathing too loud or a widow sell her home for pennies on the dollar, while Evelyn smiled and counted the commission in her head with the satisfaction of a predator finishing a meal, licking its chops while the bones cooled. "We are confiscating it for community beautification purposes." I watched from the security room inside the house, the wall of monitors painting everything in crisp 4K resolution that captured the sweat beading on her upper lip despite the cool lake breeze that carried the scent of algae and distant rain, the kind of breeze that whispered secrets across the water if you knew how to listen. Secrets like the conversations I had recorded from her board meetings where she laughed about the latest family she had ruined and toasted with champagne that cost more than their monthly mortgage, the bubbles rising like the hopes she had crushed. Evelyn did not know the boat she was stealing was not a boat at all. It was federal evidence, a floating courtroom already recording 17 felony counts in real time, the kind of evidence that would make prosecutors salivate and defense attorneys weep into their overpriced briefcases while their clients faced decades behind bars without the lake view they had stolen from others who had earned it with honest work and blood and tears. The shadow dancer sat in the water like a sleeping shark, its carbon fiber hull hiding military-grade GPS that updated every half second with coordinates precise to the inch even in fog or storm that turned the lake into a gray shroud. Underwater cameras that could read a license plate at 50 feet in pitch black and identify fish species by their scales, or a diver by the bubbles from his regulator, or a body by the way it sank with weights tied to the ankles like the secrets she had buried. What Evelyn saw was a $40,000 fishing vessel ripe for repossession, the kind of toy a divorced veteran might buy to fill the empty hours with beer and regret, and the occasional walleye that fought like hell before it gave up and ended up on a stringer, its eyes glazing over like the dreams she had extinguished. What she could not see was the trap that had taken 3 months to bait with careful violations and would spring in exactly 3 minutes with the precision of a sniper shot that had been zeroed in a desert a world away where the sand was red and the stakes were life, and the ghosts still whispered in my sleep with voices I could not silence, voices that sounded like brothers lost and promises broken. 48 hours earlier, I had been on the dock at dawn, coffee in one hand, sanding block in the other, putting the final touches on a deliberate scuff along the gunnel that looked like carelessness but was calculated to the millimeter, the kind of scuff that would photograph well in an HOA violation notice but hide the reinforced mounting point for the underwater camera array that had cost more than most people's cars and could record in infrared, thermal, and standard light with the kind of clarity that turned night into day and lies into confessions that echoed like thunder. Harold Grayson, former NCIS special agent, current lakefront nobody. Though the nobody part was a choice I made the day I hung up my badge and drove north until the lake swallowed the horizon and the ghosts in my rearview mirror faded to gray. Ghosts with names like Ramirez and Chun and the kid from Ohio who never got to see his daughter graduate high school because a sniper took him out on a rooftop in Fallujah while I called in the coordinates that were supposed to save him but only saved the mission. 18 months of investigation had led me to Harbor View Estates, a gated community on the eastern shore of Lake St. Clair where 3 HOAs overlapped like venomous snakes in a pit, their jurisdictions tangled in a way that created perfect cover for fraud, the kind of tangle that let criminals hide behind fine print and friendly smiles while they picked pockets and stole dreams and left families homeless with nothing but a beige envelope and a smile that said thank you for your cooperation while the bank took the house. I had bought the house with clean money through a Shell LLC registered in Delaware with a P.O. box that forwarded to an FBI dead drop in a coffee shop in Ann Arbor where the barista knew me as the guy who always paid cash and never smiled and left exact change like a man who counted every penny because he knew how fast they could disappear. I had spent 6 weeks establishing myself as the perfect mark, a divorced veteran with an expensive boat, no visible family ties beyond a sister in Oregon who thought I sold insurance and sent Christmas cards with pictures of kids I did not have, because the job had taken everything else, including the chance to have a family or a life outside the mission, and just enough minor violations to wave a red flag at predators who smelled blood in the water and came running with clipboards and threats. And the smug certainty that no one would fight back, because fighting cost money and time and hope, and most people had none left to spare after the fines and the fees and the fear. The first violation was the dock lights. I installed them myself over a weekend that started with rain that turned the lake to pewter and ended with the kind of sunset that turned the water to fire and made the neighbors come out to watch from their decks with beers in hand and stories on their lips about the old days when the lake was wild and the fish were bigger, bright white LEDs that turned the water beneath the pier into a swimming pool at night, the beams cutting through the murk to illuminate schools of perch darting like silver arrows, and the occasional muskie lurking in the shadows with teeth that could take a finger or a toe if you were stupid enough to swim at dusk, when the big ones hunted, and the water turned cold like the hearts of those who ruled from balconies. To Evelyn, they were gaudy violations of lakefront aesthetics, the kind of thing that lowered property values by offending her delicate sensibilities and ruining the view from her third-floor balcony, where she sipped Chardonnay from crystal stems and planned her next acquisition while pretending to watch the eagles that nested in the dead pine across the bay and ignored the families she was destroying one fine at a time with the precision of a surgeon who enjoyed the cut. To me, they were high-resolution underwater cameras feeding directly to an FBI server in Detroit, the lenses coated with anti-fouling that kept barnacles at bay and the footage crystal clear even when the lake turned to chocolate milk after a storm that dumped 3 inches in an hour and turned the roads to rivers and the basements to swimming pools where dreams drowned. The lights themselves were equipped with motion sensors and facial recognition software that had been building a database of every face that approached my property since the day I flipped the switch, cross-referencing with DMV records, known associates, and even social media posts from the community Facebook group, where Evelyn bragged about her latest fine collection and posted pictures of her prize petunias that looked like they had been grown in a lab under fluorescent lights with no soul and no scent and no life. The second was the music. Every Thursday at 7:55 p.m., I played classic rock at exactly 85 decibels, loud enough to trigger the HOA noise ordinance that had been written with the precision of a scalpel by a lawyer who billed by the hour and loved the sound of his own voice, but quiet enough that no actual neighbor complained because the sound carried over water and dissipated before it reached the next dock, where kids were doing homework or couples arguing about money or the widow next door who played her husband's old records and cried into her tea while the music drifted across the lake like a memory of better days when love was new and the world was kind. The speakers were wired with parabolic microphones that had been capturing conversations throughout the Harborview community for weeks, the kind of mics that could pick up a whisper from across the pool during one of Evelyn's infamous board meetings where the real decisions were made over Chardonnay and veiled threats about property values and community standards and how certain residents needed to be taught a lesson before they brought the whole neighborhood down with their non-compliant mailboxes and their dogs that barked and their children who laughed too loud. The third was the boat itself. I left the keys in plain sight on the kitchen counter, visible through the window to anyone with binoculars from the community observation deck that Evelyn had installed under the guise of eagle watching, but really used to spy on non-compliant residents who dared to paint their mailbox the wrong shade of khaki, or plant a rose bush that bloomed too red, or had a dog that barked too loud, or a life that did not fit her vision of perfection. Evelyn took the bait like a bass hitting a spinnerbait in spring, her eyes narrowing every time she power-walked past in her matching teal outfit, and saw the shadow dancer bobbing gently at the dock. The name painted in silver script that caught the light like a challenge and made her lips thin with calculation and her step quicken with purpose and her mind spin with plans that smelled like greed and tasted like victory. She had been president of the Harborview HOA for 4 years, but her real business was real estate theft. The kind that left families homeless and bank accounts empty while she smiled for the local paper at ribbon cuttings for new condos built on land she had stolen with fines and threats, and the kind of legal paperwork that looked official but crumbled under scrutiny like the dreams she destroyed one by one with the patience of a spider spinning a web that caught more than flies. With her brother-in-law, Vincent Caldwell, a developer who specialized in distressed waterfront properties and had a smile that could sell ice to penguins in winter and a handshake that left you counting your fingers afterward while he counted your money in offshore accounts, and my old Navy buddy Leonard Brooks, now head of security for Caldwell Properties with a penchant for bending rules the way he used to bend steel in the gym during PT when we were both young and thought we were invincible. And the world was black and white with no gray areas for corruption or compromise. They had forced 47 sales in 5 years, pocketing $23 million in properties that had been in families for generations. Properties with swing sets in the yard and grandmother's gardens that were bulldozed for McMansions with vinyl siding and no soul and views that cost extra and came with HOA fees that never ended and fines that grew like cancer until the owners had no choice but to sell or lose everything to the bank that Evelyn had in her pocket like a pet on a leash. Leonard knew my real background from our days in Coronado. The shared sweat and sand that bonded men for life in ways civilians could never understand. The kind of bond that made you take a bullet for a stranger because he wore the same trident and bled the same color and carried the same weight that never got lighter no matter how far you ran. What he did not know was that I had been investigating him for 6 months, ever since a tip from a retired chief in San Diego pointed me toward a pattern of veteran targeting that hit too close to home. Veterans who had come back from hell only to find it waiting in their mailboxes with beige envelopes and fines they could not pay and threats that sounded like concern but smelled like greed and left them sleeping in their cars while Evelyn sipped Chardonnay on her balcony and toasted to another successful acquisition with the kind of laugh that echoed like breaking glass. The trap began with the community meeting 3 nights ago in the clubhouse that smelled of lemon polish and desperation. The kind of smell that clung to carpet after too many meetings and too few truths. The air thick with the scent of coffee that had been sitting since morning and the faint perfume of fear from residents who knew something was wrong, but did not know how wrong or how deep the rot went or how many lives it had already claimed. 43 residents packed the folding chairs that squeaked under their weight like accusations. Most of them genuine homeowners who had no idea their dues were funding a criminal enterprise that would make the mafia blush with its efficiency and its cruelty and its complete lack of conscience or remorse. Evelyn stood at the podium in a cream suit that probably cost more than my truck, pearls gleaming like tiny accusations under the fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry hornets and made everyone look a little sick, a little tired, a little defeated before the meeting even started like soldiers before a battle they knew they would lose. Maintaining our standards requires vigilance against those who compromise property values, she said, her eyes locking on mine across the room with the precision of a laser sight that had been zeroed on my dock lights weeks ago when she first noticed the new resident who did not bow or apologize or pay the fine without question like the others. New residents sometimes need guidance to understand our expectations. The room murmured like a hive disturbed, the sound of forks scraping plates at a dinner no one wanted to attend, but everyone showed up for, because missing meant a fine and a visit from security and a mark on your permanent record that never went away no matter how many times you painted the mailbox the right shade. I smiled, knowing every word was being recorded by the microphone hidden in the potted ficus behind her, the plant itself a violation of the no artificial greenery rule, but overlooked because Evelyn liked the look and no one dared tell her no. Not even the treasurer who knew where the bodies were buried in the budget and the lake and the smiles that hid the knives. After the meeting, Leonard cornered me in the parking lot under the sodium lamps that turned everything orange like a bad tan from a bottle, the asphalt still warm from the day and smelling of tar and regret, and the kind of summer night that made you remember why you fought and why you came home and why you could never really come home. Harold, he said, using the name I had given the community with the familiarity of shared foxholes and midnight watches when we took turns sleeping with one eye open and a rifle across our laps, while the desert wind howled like ghosts that followed us across oceans. You might want to rethink your approach. Evelyn does not like challenges. Is that advice or threat? Just truth. She has connections, political, legal, people who make problems disappear like smoke in the wind or bodies in the lake if the rumors were true and the divers never found them because they were paid not to look or threatened not to speak. He paused, studying my face for cracks the way he used to study maps for IEDs in the dust of Hellman where the sun baked the blood into the sand, and the air tasted of diesel and death, and the kind of fear that never washed off. Keep your head down. Pay the fines. I nodded, recording every syllable on the phone in my pocket that looked like a regular smartphone, but was NCIS issue with encryption that would make the NSA jealous and a battery that lasted 3 days on standby, even when it was streaming 4K video to a server in Quantico, where analysts were already building the case brick by brick with the patience of men who had seen worse and knew how to wait. Tonight was the payoff. I watched Evelyn fumble with the Shadow Dancer's ignition, her assistants whispering about legal cover and asset acquisition while the boat's systems woke up like a predator sensing prey, the dashboard lights flickering to life in a sequence only I knew meant full surveillance engaged. The kind of sequence that had been programmed in a lab in Virginia with coffee and code, and the kind of focus that came from knowing lives depended on it and justice was a dish best served cold on the waterware. The waves carried away the screams. The engine purred to life, a custom electric motor silent enough to capture every word in crystal clarity without the rumble of a gas engine to mask confessions or the slap of waves against the hull that could drown out a lie or a scream or the sound of an empire crumbling. Beautiful machine, Vincent said, running a hand along the rail with the appreciation of a man who saw dollar signs in carbon fiber and dreamed of condos with lake views and boat slips that cost more than houses and came with HOA fees that never ended and fines that grew like cancer until the owners had no choice but to sell or lose everything to the bank that Evelyn had in her pocket like a pet on a leash that barked on command. Worth 120, maybe 130 with mods. 127, Evelyn corrected, consulting her tablet with the glow reflecting off her pearls like tiny moons orbiting her ego, plus 40 in upgrades. Covers his violations and seeds the next target, the kind of target that had a swing set and a vegetable garden and a family that would be out on the street by Christmas if she had her way, and the lawyers she paid to make it happen with paperwork that looked legitimate but was built on lies like a house of cards in a hurricane. They pulled away from the dock at 11:52 p.m., heading for open water where the lights of Harbor View faded into the distance like dying stars in a sky polluted by ambition and greed, and the kind of suburban nightmare that hid behind perfect lawns and matching mailboxes and smiles that cut deeper than knives. At 12:01 a.m., 3.7 miles out where the water turned federal and the stars were brighter without the glare of suburban McMansions with their perfect lawns and empty souls, and their owners who looked the other way. The GPS locked with a soft chime only I could hear through the monitor in my security room that looked like a hobbyist man cave, but was a federal command center with servers humming and coffee brewing and the weight of justice in the air thick enough to cut with a knife that had been sharpened on the whetstone of patience. The wheel froze in Evelyn's hands like it had been welded by an angry god who had seen enough of her kind and decided it was time to end the game. The throttle went dead to her commands, the engine humming but unresponsive like a promise broken by someone who never intended to keep it in the first place, and laughed while it shattered. The boat began a slow, perfect circle that would continue until intervention, each revolution a new frame in the federal case file that would bury them all in paperwork and prison blues and the kind of regret that came too late and tasted like ashes. Evelyn yanked at the controls, her pearls swinging like a pendulum counting down to doom, her face twisting from triumph to terror in the dashboard glow that turned her skin green like money she would never spend again and envy she could no longer hide. What the hell? Vincent tried the engine kill switch, his face going from smug to sickly in the green light that made him look like a corpse already rising from the lake with accusations in its eyes. Nothing. The assistant's face went white as the clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the deck like a gavel in a courtroom she would soon know too well, the sound echoing across the water like a warning that came too late and fell on deaf ears. "We are being tracked," she whispered, her legal training kicking in too late to save her, but early enough to damn her with knowledge that would haunt her in a cell with no lake view and no pearls to count her tears or her years. I dialed Admiral Morrison on the secure line that bypassed cell towers and went straight to satellite, the kind of line that had saved lives in places where minutes mattered and seconds were the difference between a body bag and a metal pin to a chest that still breathed and a story that ended with honor. Trap sprung. 3 subjects aboard, full confessions recorded. Coast Guard en route, ETA 23 minutes. Copy that, Grayson. Outstanding work. 18 months for 3 minutes. Worth every sleepless night and every lie I told to get here. Every smile that hit a knife, and every handshake that counted fingers afterward, and every moment I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had become the bait to catch the sharks that fed on the weak. The circular pattern continued, each revolution adding evidence like rings on a tree that had seen too much, the water slapping the hull in a rhythm that mocked their panic and built like a drumbeat to Judgment Day with the kind of inevitability that came from planning and patience and the law on your side. Evelyn's panic built like a storm over the lake, the wind picking up and whipping whitecaps that slapped the hull and sprayed salt that stung their eyes and tasted like tears they had caused others to shed in rivers that fed the lake. "This is HOA authority," she shouted into the night, as if volume could override maritime law or common sense or the reality that was closing in like the cutter on the horizon with its lights cutting through the dark like truth through lies that had been told for too long. Vincent tried to rationalize, his CFO brain spinning numbers like a slot machine that always came up lemons and regret, and the kind of loss that could not be written off on a tax return or hidden in offshore accounts. Mechanical failure. We are victims too. Catherine Wells saw the truth first, her lawyer eyes scanning the dashboard like it was a contract full of fine print that would bury them 6 feet under in a prison yard with no appeal and no parole. We are on a federal vessel confessing to RICO violations while being recorded in 4K with audio that could pick up a heartbeat or a lie or the sound of a career ending in disgrace and a life unraveling like a cheap sweater. Call lawyers now before we say something that buries us deeper than the lake itself, and the fish that would pick our bones clean and the secrets that would surface like bubbles from the deep. Leonard's final call came at 12:26 a.m., his voice shaking like it had the night we lost Ramirez and Ramadi to an IED that turned a Humvee into confetti and a friend into a memory that still woke me at 3 a.m., with the smell of burning rubber and the sound of screams that echoed in my dreams. "Harold, tell me this is not what I think." "It is exactly what you think, Leonard. Turn state's evidence or go down with them for the rest of your life in a cell with no lake view and no second chances and no one to blame but the man in the mirror who sold his soul for a paycheck and a promise that turned to ash." The line went dead, but not before I heard Evelyn in the background screaming about jurisdiction and lawsuits, and how dare you betray me after everything I have done for you and your family and the favors I called in to get you this job that paid for your kids' college but cost you your honor. Coast Guard arrived at 12:31, searchlights pinning the shadow dancer like a bug on a board under a magnifying glass that burned with the heat of justice long overdue and the kind of light that exposed everything. Lieutenant Commander Reyes boarded with the efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times in worse weather with bigger fish and worse storms that tossed ships like toys and men like chaff. "You are under arrest for theft of federal property, conspiracy, and RICO." Evelyn's last words before cuffs were, "This is HOA jurisdiction." Reyes smiled the way you smile at a child who thinks the moon is made of cheese and the stars are just holes in the blanket of night, and the world revolves around her little kingdom of khaki and control. "Ma'am, HOA stands for Homeowners Association, not higher than Oceanic Authority. The lake is federal. Your authority ends at the high water mark where the sand meets the water and the law meets the liars who thought they were above it all and untouchable like gods in teal tracksuits." 6 months later, testimony in federal court that smelled of lemon polish and justice, The kind of justice that was slow but sure and left no room for appeals or alibis, or the kind of deals that let the rich walk free with a slap on the wrist and a fine they could pay with pocket change. Evelyn, 45 years in a cell with no lake view and no pearls to count her tears or her regrets that came too late, like the tide that always returns. Vincent, 51, for the money he laundered through fake construction bids that built nothing but his ego and his empire of lies that crumbled like sand castles at high tide. Catherine, 22, plus permanent disbarment that ended her career in a hearing room full of her former colleagues who looked away and pretended they had never known her or shaken her hand or taken her money for services rendered in the dark. Leonard, 8, with cooperation that saved him from life, but not from the guilt that would follow him like a shadow in the yard where he would pace and remember the friends he had betrayed and the lives he had ruined for a paycheck and a promise that turned to ash in his mouth. 47 properties returned to families who thought they had lost everything. 23 million in restitution that bought back swing sets and vegetable gardens, and the kind of peace that money cannot buy but justice can restore with a gavel and a sentence and the sound of a door closing on corruption like a coffin lid. Harborview became a cooperative, dues transparent, decisions democratic, the kind of place where neighbors waved instead of watched, and the only thing confiscated was corruption and the illusion of power that had fooled so many for so long, like a magician's trick revealed in the light of day. The Shadow Dancer trains new agents now, its hull cutting through ways while rookies learn how to turn toys into tools of justice that float and fight and bring the bad guys to their knees with evidence and law and the kind of patience that wins wars one case at a time. I consult nationwide, teaching communities how to spot the Evelyns before they strike, how to read the fine print and fight the good fight with evidence and allies, and the kind of courage that comes from knowing you are not alone and the law is on your side if you know how to use it like a weapon forged in fire. Justice floats, but it needs wind in its sails. And sometimes that wind comes from a trap set by someone who knows exactly how the game is played and refuses to lose, refuses to let the bullies win, refuses to let the lake become a graveyard of dreams stolen by those who thought they were untouchable, like gods in teal tracksuits who ruled from balconies with Chardonnay and contempt. What about you? Ever faced injustice hiding behind bylaws and badges? Did you fight, fold, or set your own trap? Share your story below, especially if violence or corruption knocked on your door. Where do you draw the line between compliance and resistance? The algorithm rewards truth, but your neighbors might need the blueprint more.